morning, everybody. As we watch the sunrise this morning here across the midsection of the country, we can see another day of really poor air quality here because of some of the Canadian wildfire smoke that has been pulled into this deeper trough that continues to sit over parts of like the Hudson Bay, Ontario, and Quebec region. But if I take you back to yesterday, just take a look at this. There we go. This is getting into yesterday afternoon, evening on Sunday. You can really see kind of the full extent of that smoke getting pulled here across parts of the upper Midwest out of the northern plains and then right here into the Great Lakes region. But as a lot of us were watching satellite data yesterday, there were several things that were quite striking on this, but I'd like to hone in on this storm right here. There were several to talk about, but this one here was quite impressive. If we take a real close look, let me take you back and show you this one. We're zooming in on parts of Nebraska and Kansas, and let me go back even further because this storm that blew up right here on the border was absolutely, terrifying. It's huge. And some of the satellite data here, just looking at the overshooting top and the kind of the gravity waves that kind of bounce off of the stable part of the very bottom of the stratosphere, and then this anvil that just cast an enormous shadow by the time the evening got there. Just kind of a stunning view of a powerful and large supercell. You can see we had others in Nebraska, and you can see all the smoke that was to the north of us. Look at this air quality issue going on in parts of Iowa. I mean, that's not to say it's not in the other states. It's just I can see it so clearly here in Iowa. But one of my former students works out here in Kansas. He works in Dodge City, and his name is Adam Springer. I'm really proud of this kid. He was one of my great students I had at the University of Illinois. And he works the National Weather Service, Dodge City. There's the radar, and in the background, that monster. So I thank Adam for letting me show this to all of you today, and just a brilliant photo. I'm really quite jealous that I don't have pictures like this on my camera roll, but just incredible. Now, if we just stitch the whole weekend together and look at hail we had this past weekend, you can see what that storm did right in through here. And also the storms that followed and earlier in the weekend in parts of Nebraska. Look at the hail that was in parts of Colorado, New Mexico, Texas. Some of the storms that came through the Midwest produced it as well. If we look at the rainfall from this, again, more flooding rains in parts of New England, heavy rains in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. And once again, this stretch right in through here where some of these storms just continue to deliver, tremendous amounts of rain. And it is a contrast to last year because remember, this area was under a large ridge of high pressure a year ago. We were absolutely baking down here in this part of the Mid-South, getting into the South and the Southern Plains, and we've got storms this year, so it's a pretty sizable pattern flip. Now that pattern flip is, I think, best seen if I take you back to the Northwest, because I was kind of fascinated to watch the way the cloud field here, upper level cloud field, was just kind of streaming over the top of the ridge. Can you see it? Normally when I see flow like this in the west, I often think of the mountains just generating a lot of storms, but they weren't doing this. It was quite dry air, of course, and as a result, we just had the high thin cloud layer here, and then underneath it, we can see some of the first larger wildfires for the western United States happening. There's one right here, and this is kind of southwestern corner of Oregon. Now, comparatively to the fires in Canada we've seen, this doesn't look like much, but we have to just start paying attention to this going forward. So our latest forecast loop here of vertically integrated smoke from the rapid refresh model, again, shows the pattern, but also shows some of the wildfires coming out here in this part of the country. So the big fires are here in British Columbia, and you can see the smoke from them getting pulled around that deeper trough. And one of the big questions we're going to have here is with this pattern, how long does this trough persist? Because if it sticks around, it keeps the ridge west. And we need to answer that question here in a few moments. But as it stands, we have another day where there are air quality issues from Montana and Wyoming. They're going to stretch across the Midwest, getting into Iowa. It'll go through Illinois all the way into New England. So this whole region is going to have air quality issues today. While we have heat advisories, excessive heat watches and warnings that stretch from the southern tip of Florida throughout parts of the south here and getting into the southwestern United States. We have winds today that might be gusty in parts of the Columbia Basin, 20-mile-an-hour gusts, and I was reading the National Weather Service page this morning for this region and their discussion, and given the drier fuels in the area and those winds, there is the risk of wildfires here, so that's a red flag warning out for parts of Oregon getting into Washington. So here it is. This is the pattern, and I got to let you know something. We finally had a visit from someone we haven't seen in a while. It's the Bermuda High. Now, will it stick around? Will it be a permanent feature for the rest of the year? That still remains to be questioned, but in the near term, it is helping to influence the flow, staying something like this. Now, this large ridge that's in place here is going to this week continue to influence primarily this region. But what we need to do is watch it flex a bit farther to the north. And we need to see how it interacts with the trough that's over the Hudson Bay or south of the Hudson Bay between there and the Great Lakes. Because while this pattern stays like this, there will be a stormy corridor that sets up into this area. All right. But when it begins to shift around and possibly move, then this begins to possibly turn over a bit drier. That is one scenario, but also begins to run the risk of spreading some heat back into this section of the country out of the ridge in the west. So if we look at where our thunderstorms are going to be today, this is the latest update from the Storm Prediction Center. What we have here are ridge-running storms coming into the trough. And so we'll keep an eye very closely today on the radar from Wyoming, South Dakota into Nebraska, and then stretching down here into parts of the Missouri Valley, and then we're going to watch the Ohio Valley today for our risk of severe storms. Tomorrow, it's going to shift a bit farther east, so we're going to watch this area very closely, but just note how large of an area we do expect to see thunderstorm activity here in the day 2 time frame, which would be the 18th. And from there, we'll just look at day 3. Again, it's a stormy pattern for a large part of the country here, and we're going to be seeing a frontal boundary slide through. That's going to be bringing in a chance for storms here, but again, watch the Ohio River Valley for some storms as well. Bigger picture, this is what the next 7 days holds from the WPC, and I'm really looking at this for those stormy corridors. So there will be isolated storms and kind of an attempt at getting a monsoon going here. We then see the storms coming out, running over the ridge, and then the frontal boundaries that slide through here. That's where we expect to see our heaviest rains. But when you start to see this map for what it isn't, you start to see there is, a forecast for a drier corridor in through here, also along the Appalachian Mountains and east until you get up to the shoreline where there will be the daily sea breeze that initiates storms along the Gulf Coast and East Coast. We see much of Texas staying quite hot and dry, and there's going to be a lot of heat in the western United States with this pattern as well. Now, there is that ongoing drought we've been talking about for quite some time in the Canadian Prairie, and there are better storm chances here, but this is not the type of storm chances that cure, a drought, but there will be isolated storms into this area. Just take note that these total precipitation amounts are not up even to an inch yet on my color bar here, so we're looking at 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch according to the WPC at this point. That same kind of forecast is being echoed by the European model, and this is the 0Z run. And what we're doing here is we're looking over the next week at the anomalies. So we, again, see those drier corridors on either side of the heavier rains. Got the Appalachian Mountain issue here getting into the Carolinas of Virginia. A little bit drier down throughout the south, but you do notice that along the Gulf Coast, more storms. Texas will run we will run storm over the ridges, but quite hot into Texas throughout the rest of this week. So I like the balance between those two images just to show you the contrast. Remember, all of my tools for the point location forecasts plus all the maps are at agweather.com, ag-wx.com. From here, let's get to those probability maps because this kind of helps us understand the operational runs I just showed you. This is the 10-day outlook on the best chances of grabbing an inch. So we start to see those corridors that the models are picking up on. So the ridge runners along the southern tail of the front, the sea breeze, but the drier regions stretched in between. And we just have to look at this and understand what the pattern is kind of advertising overall, because if we look at those drier regions, this is the places expected to get less than 1/2 of an inch. And we really begin to identify where the monsoon is not set up yet. We get to see how hot and dry it'll be throughout much of the west. Although there are isolated storms coming in with this, it's not widespread coverage on rain. And there's just some developing concern about this region given how dry it has been lately, right in through here, missing out on some of the bigger storm clusters. And we worry about what that might do as we finish pollination and start to move our way toward grain fill for the crops grown in this particular area. All right. So from here, let's go take a look at the pattern. So I've just played this out already to Wednesday, and what I'm looking for is persistence in it. So I want to see this trough stick around and this broader trough stick around and the ridge that's here. All right. Now, it's not that I want that. I'm looking for that is what I'm trying to say, because I need to see evidence that something's going to overturn this pattern. And as I play this all the way through next weekend into early next week, you can still see the larger ridge opening itself over, the Four Corners region. There's troughing that's still here in the Gulf of Alaska. And we do have lower heights stretching out of this Hudson Bay Trough across the, this section of the eastern side of North America. There is, right here, the potential for the Bermuda High to still be around. So we often think about this as to where it can start to pump in that heat and pump in that moisture. But what we notice is that going out there past next Tuesday into next Wednesday and Thursday, the ensemble averages are beginning to just show higher heights, meaning greater heat pumping a bit farther to the north. But as you know, we tend to keep an eye on this 588 line right here to try to denote where we expect to see storms. And there are some indicators that even though the models are suggesting this region's dry, the meteorology would say, hey, we're going to get storms that run over this ridge if there is enough moisture coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico. So while we expect hot and very dry conditions, under the ridge with isolated storms throughout the west, we'll get the storms along the coast here, and we're going to watch for storms to cascade over this ridge. That would be what this pattern would advertise to me. So I got to get the moisture there. So as we've been looking at, this is a chance, a probability of getting the precipitable water, that's how much juice is in the atmosphere, over 1.5 inches. That means that's how much could come out. And what we're going to watch for is during that time when that ridge really opens here, are we capable of pulling that out of the south and getting it north? And the models are trying to do that. But it's out there day 8, 9, 10 that they're trying to open that up. Do you see it? So that makes me wonder how dry, next week will be. Because we know we're limited on moisture, some of it, here over the next week. You saw that larger dry forecast I gave you a few moments ago. But do we start to fill that in? This will be what I'll be watching out there that far. So the week 2 models, it makes sense that they're drier because we're waiting to see if that moisture comes into this area. And you can see it's also here in the European model. I apologize, but I really need to discount the GFS ensemble at this point. It's really not handling the Gulf Coast very well, and it's not picking up on that same kind of outlook that both the European and the CPC are finding here. So keep an eye focused right here on these 2 maps as I think we look out there at the week 2. All right. Let's flip this over to a quick discussion on temperature before we move out into the longer range here. Death Valley, pulled up the National Weather Service page out of Las Vegas. I'm sure you saw this in the news, but the world record is 134 degrees Fahrenheit. They did break a daily record on Sunday at 128 degrees, so just a few degrees off that world record. And as we saw, the heat advisories, watches, and warnings still sit throughout this part of the country as that ridge opens up. So let's go have a look at those high temperatures. Here's Monday's high temperatures. Okay, we can see the influence of the cooler air because of that deeper trough, but hot in Texas, hot Four Corners, hot throughout California, and hot up into Montana. Near normal temps throughout the southeast. First time we've really seen just sustained 90s here for a while. But again, on Tuesday, the heat's in the south, the heat's in the west. Remember, by Wednesday, we have that next front that comes through later this week. And how far to the south does it make it? Not far. So this is just another week of a lot of hundreds throughout this whole region here. That's Thursday's highs getting into Friday, and then into Saturday, and into Sunday. And it's been amazing to see the split in Texas from south central Texas up here to the panhandles on the temperature pattern this year. At times it's been 15 degrees cooler, and it's just all been about the placement of that deeper trough of low pressure and its influence on this whole side of the country here as we look out at temperatures on Sunday. Where are we going from there? We'll just take a look here at the 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. Let's stretch it out there today, 5 through 10. What did happen this weekend is that all of last week we watched the models predict more heat here and then fail to produce it. And now we're starting to see a bit more consistency in filling this in with some warmer conditions in the last few days of July and the beginning of August. So that's most of the country here seeing some hotter conditions during that time. Now, if the moisture is kept open for this whole region, then this means it's hot and humid and stormy, while the hot, dry conditions tend to set up over the west. So let's watch this carefully, watch the model evolution with me this week, and we'll continue to kind of have a discussion about it. Really quickly, before I get into some of the tropical things, I'm going to take you to the CPC website, and I do want to show you their latest long-range outlook for July 29th through August 11th. You see, I mentioned that it was the end of July into early August that we saw the models over the weekend trend a bit hotter here, but the CPC is calling for more persistence. So they're trying to keep the heat west, more persistent troughing over the Great Lakes to Hudson Bay. And that's also why they keep this corridor stormy while they have this a bit drier here in the west. So we'll watch the evolution of this and keep this longer range discussion going. But right now, I think we need to keep a close eye on the tropics, because here's Don. But do you see the trade winds? That is what's going on here with the final return of the broader high pressure that Don is influencing here from the Bermuda High, which means we got to keep an eye on Africa. We've been seeing dust coming off of Africa as of late, but now we're starting to see more active convection. And I was just looking this morning at one of my favorite sites, weathernerds.org, and they put together tropical cyclone tracks. And while there's nothing right now that the National Hurricane Center is watching over the next 7 days, except for just keeping an eye on Don, you'll watch again that some of the model low tracks are beginning to show up for some sort of tropical low pressure development. So I'm not saying there's something here now. It's just what we need to be watching. This is going to be the corridor that those trade winds are going to blow through. And I also want to point out that over in the Pacific, we did have a typhoon that went into, right here this morning for us is on the kind of the southeastern border of China. And we always watch these this time of year because if they move inland and dissipate, then they kind of go off the radar as having a major influence on the pattern. But remember, when these typhoons run up toward Japan and get here into the North Pacific, they can be a major influencer of the North American weather pattern with time. What I will comment on as we finish this up today is just the ocean temperature pattern. El Nino continues to grow. We continue to see the very influential Pacific Meridional mode cold water in through here, but the heat to the north of it. And the Atlantic is still quite hot. So checking in on where things are, this is our time series of ocean temperatures in Nino region 3.4. That's right here in the middle of the Pacific. We're almost back up to a degree Celsius above average. And if we come over here on another great website, tropicaltidbits.com, and you choose a region, let's go choose the Western Atlantic, we can once again just see the heat that is in this section of the Atlantic. So the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and Western Atlantic. So we still have ocean temperatures here that are well into the 90s. So that's just why when we start to see a model say, hey, we're going to kick off some low pressure, we start to get concerned about that. And what this is, by the way, that's Don. All right. Okay, so I think we're going to have plenty on our plate to keep an eye on this week, and I just look forward to keeping you ahead of it. So we'll talk again soon. Thanks.